So you have personal experience with the Nimitz?
Not. You mean the Nimitz incident or the ship itself?
The ship itself.
I don't know. I had a bunch of traps on a bunch of different ships. I'm not sure if I don't think I ever landed on the Nimitz.
Yeah,
I've been on it on my DV tour. So when after I retired, I took a bunch of people out to the Nimitz. A friend of mine was the executive officer of the Nimitz. And so I went out there.
And what I learned on board is that they're all part of is it a strike group? Is that what they call it?
Yeah. So if you can think of it's called a carrier strike group. If you can think of a carrier strike group as like a football team, okay? There's a bunch of different positions, and they all have their specific jobs.
Each one of them being a different ship.
Well, not just ships, but ships and squadrons that are on the aircraft carrier. Okay, so you've got destroyers that are in charge of or working in the anti-submarine network. You've got the ship like the Princeton, which is in charge of the air arena. There's a submarine underneath that obviously is dealing with other submarines. Then you've got all 9 squadrons roughly on the aircraft carrier itself. A bunch of them are fighters. There's airborne early warning. There's a helicopter squadron. There's jammers. So everybody's got their own role. Now, when the carrier strike group is not being used as a strike group, all of those positions go to their own home bases. So all the ships go to their home ports, the squadrons go to their home bases, and everybody does unit level training. So they just get better at, flying an airplane or maneuvering a ship or whatever it is. And then as you get closer to going on deployment, and the deployments are scheduled years in advance, then they start bringing everybody together piece by piece, crawl, walk, run, a month on, a month off. The planes will go down and go to ranges in either Florida or Southern California to do some bombing and aerial work. The ships do whatever ships do. I'm not a ship guy, so I'm not super familiar with it. But then slowly and surely everybody starts coming together. Once they're kind of qualified on a unit level, then they start coming together as a strike group.
And how many total ships in a strike group?
I think it's like 6. 5 to 6, something like that.
So anyway, that was new to me. I just picture an aircraft carrier out there doing its thing, but no, they don't travel alone.
No.
This is a huge command, and there's a commander of the aircraft carrier, and then there's a commander of the entire strike group.
Yeah, the admiral's in charge of the strike group, and he's the real boss in this whole thing. So, and the carrier has 2 different captains. There's the captain of the ship, his rank is a captain, and he's also his position is a captain. So he's both a captain by rank and by position as the boss of the ship itself. But if you think about the ship as like an apartment building, then you fill it up with the tenants. And in fact, they're called tenant commands that come on board. And those are all the squadrons. And the squadrons are commanded by the commander of the air wing, commander of the air group. And he's also a captain. So you've got 2 people of equal rank that together work to make the ship and the air wing a team.
So going back to 2004 in the Nimitz incident,
Yep.
Tell us, based on your understanding, what was going on with the USS Nimitz at that time?
Okay, they were in one of their workup periods. So they were just off the coast of San Diego, and in the West Coast Navy, we do most of our workups off of San Diego when we're afloat, and it's always roughly the same spot. And
is that where you first earned your wings?
I first earned my wings carrier qualifying in the Gulf of Mexico on the Lexington, tiny little aircraft carrier in an A4. But then I went and flew A6s out of Whidbey Island. So the plane I flew first was a medium all-weather bomber, day-night bomber. And my ship was the Ranger. And the Ranger was stationed down in San Diego. So whenever the ship and the air wing and the strike group were doing workups, we would all kind of gather from, Whidbey Island, which is near Seattle, and Lemoore, and the fighter guys out in San Diego, and, people or squadrons from all different parts of the West Coast would all congregate, and the ship would pull out, and we'd all land on it. And then the other ships in the strike group would join us, but not always. I mean, it depends on what level of training you're doing. Sometimes it's just the carrier, and sometimes the ships are doing their thing separately. So, but like I said, as you're working up to go on your 6-month deployment, where everybody's at the top of their game because they're going into a combat zone, or potentially they're getting ready to be the carrier that's on call for whatever hotspot happens in the world, and it's a roughly 18-month process to get up to speed. One one of the phases of that training is Comp 2X, and it's where, for the first time, the ships and the air wing and the carrier all come together and try to operate as a big unit, as a big football team, everybody doing their job.
And that's what was going on at that time with the Nimitz?
That's exactly right, yeah. So...
and David Fravor
Yeah.
was the squadron commander,
Yep.
right? Which means he's, what, head of all the F-18 pilots?
In his squadron. So, and again, I've known Dave for almost 30 years now, a long time. We flew A6 together. We were on the Ranger together. I've known him forever. He was the commanding officer of VF-41, one of 3 fighter squadrons in that air wing. Okay, there was one of the other fighter squadrons was a Marine Corps fighter squadron flying the seas, and then there was another single seat Rhino or Super Hornet squadron. Okay, I know none of this makes any sense to you, but there's 3 different squadrons. They all have slightly different roles, even though they're all flying F-18s. Dave's squadron was a 2-seat F-18 squadron. Okay, so every jet had a pilot and a Wizzo in the back.
And when did you first learn about what Dave saw that day?
Yeah. So the funny thing is that this was just the best bar story ever for a long time. This happened in 2004, obviously, and then I think I first heard about it in 2007 or 8. And a mutual friend of ours, Matt Sturgis, was, we sat down at a bar, and I'm the last guy in, and Matt goes, "Hey, Dave, tell Paco the UFO story." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." Because, as pilots, one of the things you always get asked is, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" And I mean, I've been flying all my adult life. I've never seen anything.
Well, there goes that question. I thought we were going to have something good on that.
Sorry. So
anyway, the first time you heard about it was from Dave himself?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sitting in a bar over drinks. And he tells me the story, and I'm kind of looking at him to see if he's kidding or pulling my leg, but he's dead serious. And he tells me the whole thing in really, really exacting detail. And I was just kind of blown away. And I heard it over the course of the years a few more times, because then I would be the guy that said, "Hey, Dave, tell this new guy the awesome story about the UFO." And then I would share that story with my friends, and I would use the video, I think it's come to be called the Tic Tac video, the video from the other planes, as punctuation. So I would, I'd tell them the story, and I'd say, don't look at the video yet. Listen to what I say, and then the video will make sense.
How did you get the video?
It was on YouTube. It was totally open and free. It just didn't make any sense to anybody.
And what was your understanding? Because I think, we've talked to a number of people about this at this point, and I'm getting a couple interviews confused, but I think we had learned that it was put on YouTube and then taken off of YouTube.
So in 2015, I became the editor of an online fighter magazine called Fighter Sweep. And one of the first articles, I'd always wanted to write the story of this sighting, because it just stuck with me. It's just such a crazy, unique story, and it's such a great, it's just a great story. And I always wanted to write the story. So I get the opportunity. I've got a great audience now, and I call Dave up and I say, "Hey, dude, I'm writing an article on your experience. Is that all right?" And he's
What
like,
year
"Yeah."
was that?
This is 2015. So this was the first article written about the Tic Tac and Dave's experience. And it's online, it's still online if you want to check it out. It's called There I Was, the X-Files edition. You just Google that and it'll pop right up.
Is that what you shared with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I read that, obviously, in preparation for this interview, but I didn't realize that you had written it in 15. I was thinking that you wrote it, post the video being released wider.
Yeah, no. This is 2 years before the New York Times jumped on the story. So this was... For whatever it's worth, this is the first article written about the UFO experience.
Well, you don't get enough credit for that.
I don't.
Because the New York Times is getting all the credit.
Yeah, that's fine. It's whatever. So I call Dave up and I say, "I'm going to write this article about this awesome story you've been telling. Can you give me any more details?" And he goes, "You're not going to believe this. They just left. The investigation, the O&I, Office of Naval Investigations, has literally just walked out my door." And they, for the first time in 11 years, anybody is taking anything that happened on that day seriously. And the guy has interviewed everybody that was involved, all, on the Princeton, the E-2, the helicopter guy, everybody, the submarines. and they have this exhaustive, massive report. And
to be clear, who was doing this investigation?
So
what entity?
The Office of Naval Investigations,
Okay.
supposedly, but I think, and this is
11 years after the fact.
Correct.
Fravor says for the first time
Yeah.
he's actually asked about this by someone who's
by
looking
somebody who
into it.
wasn't on the Nimitz giving him grief, basically.
Right. Or at a bar.
Or at a bar, yeah. And I was like, holy crap. So I subsequently got my hands on that report, and it's exhaustive. It's got all kinds of names and details. And that's what my article is based on. So my article is basically an unclassified version of the full O&I or maybe ATIP
So wait a minute, are you
report.
saying that the report is classified then?
Yeah, it's never come out. So that cover sheet came out, and I saw that because I was just doing some research for this interview. But the whole thing, it's probably, 25, 30 pages. I got it right here.
You've got the whole report there.
Yeah.
But it's classified.
I guess. Somebody sent it to me.
Okay.
And I
And
promised.
what do you mean by the cover page has been released?
The cover page, the executive summary, and you can see that. It's on the internet. It's this thing right here. And
I'll just
it
look at
says
the first page,
executive.
I promise.
Yeah, I'll just show it to you. I promise never to. And the reason, I don't think there's anything in here that's super secret. It's just that there's a bunch of names of people who didn't want to be dragged through the muck. So,
Okay. And what relationship to that report does ATIP have, if anything?
So as far as I understand, this was an ATIP report because it was never released and it was FOIA exempt, Freedom of Information Act exempt. And an O&I report would not be FOIA exempt. So
Okay, so in other words,
That
this
is
may
the-
have been a different investigation.
no,
than
it's the
Navy
same. It's
investigation.
just that they said they were O&I. That's my understanding. I don't know what the truth behind that is. I have absolutely no proof on that other than that it was not.
Okay, so sorry. So as you sit
Yeah.
here today, you believe that when Fravor was contacted in 2015, really that was a result of ATIP investigating this incident.
That's my guess. Yeah. That's the only thing I can come up with. Anyway, so I got this, and like I said, I wrote my article after reading through this about 500 times. And so it's about as close as you can get to this original ATIP
And by the way,
investigation.
in that investigation, is it consistent with what Fravor originally told you in the bar?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And then it turns out that it's not just Fravor saying this; it's a lot of people saying this.
Well, that's what makes this, I think, a compelling story. If it was just Fravor, and again, I know him, I would mostly believe him because, it's a UFO story, right? I mean, UFO stories have always been a little bit fringy and tough to believe. But after reading this, I'm convinced that this event happened. I don't know. We can ask more questions about that later, but I'm convinced that this happened. This is an exhaustive report again, and it's very detailed.
Let's talk about the video for a second, because you said you saw it, the original YouTube video.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I think has kept the story even today a little fringy
Yep.
is the video looks like your typical UFO video, something grainy
Yeah.
in the sky. So walk us through
Sure.
the video itself, and frankly, why isn't it better?
Well, okay. So the video shows an object on a forward-looking infrared device, and it's hovering in midair. Well, let's get to that. If I could talk you through that whole episode where the video itself was recorded, I think
Okay.
it'll make a lot more sense.
And the fact that's a good idea, and also your thoughts on the fact that these guys were sent out to look for this thing, or
They weren't, though.
Okay.
You mean Dave?
Dave, yeah.
Okay, so
I'll
I'll just
walk us through the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, so just to synopsize, like really, really quickly, all the details that happened on that day. So the ships from the Carrier Strike Group are on station before the air wing shows up for some period of time, maybe 10 days before they get there. And on the 10th, they start, the Princeton itself, and only the Princeton because it's got that magnificent radar, starts picking up these things dropping from up outside of its scan volume. So if you can imagine a radar as like a television screen, and you're looking at the television screen, that goes from the surface of the Earth to, say, 60,000 feet. These objects are falling from above that scan volume and very, very, very quickly going down to 50 feet-ish, moving around for a little bit, and then disappearing or going back up. And so they have, according to this report, they have 3 instances of that. And they don't really know what it is. They have no one's ever seen this before. They at first think there's something wrong with the machinery, so they reboot the machinery. The meteorologist of the ship comes up and says, perhaps it's ice crystals, like an ice ball dropping. They don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody can figure out what's going on. But one thing that's consistent is from above the scan volume, very quickly down to sea level, and then leaving. So on the 14th of November, 2004, the Air Wing shows up. Or they may have shown up before that, or a day or so, but on the 14th is when they finally were able to get some airplanes to go check this spot out. And it's always the same spot, latitude and longitude. So there's nothing out there. It's just ocean. But it's a consistent latitude and longitude over the ocean, about 70 miles southwest of San Diego, 30 miles off the coast of Mexico, international waters.
But sorry, seeing one at a time or more than one at a time?
This report says one at a time.
Okay.
And it's very clear. And that's all the information I have on quantities. And it's also it wasn't happening frequently. I think it says very distinctly that there were only 3 instances, and one of which is the one where the pilots were there. So Dave and his wingman take off. There's 4 people in 2 airplanes. They take off and they're going to go out and do a training mission about 100 miles south of the carrier, air-to-air training mission. The commanding officer of the Marine Squadron is in a single-seat Hornet, and he takes off a little bit earlier and goes and does what's called PRONGO, a post-maintenance check flight on his airplane because some maintenance had been performed, and then assuming that it comes up all right, he's going to go and be the bad guy, the adversary for Dave and his wingman, and he's going to fly further south. Now, as he's flying, the Princeton comes up and says, "Hey, do you mind going to check out something over this water? Over the spot of the water, we've got an unidentified aerial contact." And he's like, "Sure." And he starts heading in that direction. He's about 20,000 feet, just at economy cruise, doing about, say, 250, 300 knots. And then the first of the bizarre things happens. They asked him if he's got any weapons on board. And he says, no, which is very weird. And
this is the Marine pilot?
Yes, the Marine pilot at this
Flying
point.
by himself.
Flying by himself. And he says, no, I don't have anything.
And why? What part is weird that they would ask him, or that he wouldn't have?
No, it's weird that they would ask him because we don't carry weapons unless we're in a combat zone. There's no point, right? So he flies to the spot that they've asked him to go to, and as he's getting closer, he starts a gentle descent down to about 10,000 feet. And as he gets pretty close on his radar, he picks up Dave and his wingman on radar, but that's all he sees. Princeton comes up and says, "Hey, do you mind skipping it because we got another section in the area? We don't want it. We want to deconflict. If you could just get out of the area." And he says, "Sure," but of course, being a Navy pilot and Marine, he just keeps going. And he flies right over the spot, and he sees what looks, at first he thinks maybe it's something sinking. He sees a bunch of bubbles coming up. It sounds like what he's heard the sea looks like when a ship is sinking or something like that. Mm-hmm. And his second thought is that maybe it's like an undersea atoll, just a circular thing with the waves kind of breaking over it. And the rest of the sea is glassy smooth. There's no real waves. It's just a smooth sea. So he doesn't think much of it. He sees Dave and his wingman. He turns to go away, and he looks back behind over his shoulder, and there's nothing there. Whatever was there is gone, and the sea is glassy smooth once again. And that's his experience. That's it for him. He now leaves. Dave and his wingman and the 2 Wizzos get the same call. "Hey, do you mind going to check out this spot? We think there's something there. We don't know what it is. Oh, by the way, do you have any weapons on board?" And they say, again, no. And they're all struck by how bizarre that question is. And as they're getting closer and starting to descend, Dave sees the same circle of frothing water, and he described it slightly differently. He said it looked like it was boiling, like there was a bunch of bubbles coming up, but it was a 50 to 100 meter circle. And at first he thought maybe there was a 737 or an airliner that had crashed in there because he thought he maybe saw something that was floating in the middle of that. And as he's kind of going down, he spots, and on the way there, they couldn't get anything on the radar. There's nothing that would come up on the radar. And it's a brand new airplane, super sophisticated fighter radar. And as he's going down, he first spots, he and his Wizzo and the other crews spot the Tic Tac, which is what Dave referred to it as, sort of buzzing around this water. And he said very specifically, it's oriented north-south, and it's kind of moving back and forth erratically north-south.
Over water that is bubbling or doing
frothing or whatever. Yeah, it's this spot of disturbed water, this circle of disturbed water. And so Dave starts going down. He's passing about 10,000 feet. He has his wingman hold her position above in high cover. And he starts going down. And as he's descending to try and do a low pass on this thing, he said it seemed like it took note of him. So again, it's an oblong shape, and it wasn't pointed at him. But then as he's coming down at it, it turns towards him to face its skinny end at him. And then as he's coming down in a right-hand circle, say you're at 6 o'clock now, and the thing's at 12 o'clock, and the water's in the middle. As he's coming down, the water goes calm, and the thing starts coming up at him. So it's mirroring his action. He's going down a right-hand turn. It's coming up in a right-hand turn. And they go all the way around, and they're talking. The guy in the back seat is talking to the Princeton on the radio. Is talking to the other aircraft on the radio. All 4 people in the cockpits are witnessing what's happening very clearly and distinctly. They go around once, and Dave digs. There's this fighter maneuver called, cutting off the circle here, or a low yo-yo to cut off the vector, to try and rendezvous on whatever it is you're fighting against. And he goes nose low, and as he's coming up, the thing orients itself towards him and accelerates to the southeast in such a fashion that it's gone in about 5 seconds.
How close do we think Dave got to it?
I don't know. I didn't get that information. Pretty close. I mean, you mean as he's trying to rendezvous on it, half a mile, which is super close in air-to-air. Like he could see everything at half a mile.
So at half a mile, you could also be able to judge the size of it?
Yeah, and so that's where the measurement of the Tic Tac comes from. Dave said in his assessment it was roughly fighter-sized, and the Rhino is about 46 feet long. So he said it was basically the size of my airplane.
So the radar on the Princeton would not be able to give you any indication of size?
Not really. No, not that specifically. A bigger blip, like a 747, would have a bigger blip than a fighter, but a lot of that has to do with returns, radar returns. So a big stealth airplane would have a very small return.
So in the report, are all 4 of those pilots interviewed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And all of them say they saw it with their own eyes?
Yes. Yeah.
And all described it essentially Tic Tac-ish?
Yeah.
And roughly the same size?
Yeah, so his backseater described it as having, like, the exterior was like a whiteboard. It looked like a whiteboard material. So it was oblong, Tic Tac, nothing, no windows, no wings, no nacelles, no engines. And it looked like a whiteboard, basically, for whatever that's worth.
Okay. So does Fravor see it again, or that was it for Fravor?
He never sees it again. So they call the Princeton and say, we just lost that thing. Whatever it was, it's gone. Can you give us a snap vector? Which means, like, if you have it on radar, just point us at it and we'll go check it out again. And Princeton says it's gone. Sorry. So they rejoin and they're going to go proceed with their training that they were originally tasked to do. And a few moments later, the Princeton comes up and says, "You're not going to believe this. It's at your cap," which is the latitude and longitude that they were going to begin their sets. So there's a north cap and a south cap. The good guys go to the north cap because they're defending the ship, and the Marine Corps Hornet would have gone to the south cap because he's pretending to attack the ship. And
cap is short for something?
Combat Air Patrol.
Okay.
But you have a cap point, so that's where you would, this theoretical latitude and longitude that you would just orbit around at 25,000 feet, waiting for something to pop up, and then you go attack it. And
so now it's hanging out.
It's hanging
where
out.
They're about to do their exercise, essentially.
Exactly. So it's hanging out at their cap at, say, 25,000 feet. They never saw it. It left before they got there, and they ran out of gas. They couldn't play around anymore. So they land on the ship, and they go into CVIC, which is the Carrier Intelligence Center. And a bunch of the guys are wearing tinfoil hats and, making fun of them. And, that Dave's a senior guy. He's the commanding officer of the squadron, and he sits down with the intelligence guy and he debriefs him. And he's like, this is what fucking happened. And he's not going to mess around. He's a very serious guy when he wants to be.
But that's a true story. He had reported that some people were already joking around with tinfoil hats when he walked in?
100%, yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
That's
and
funny.
I'll show you later when it's relevant, but every day there's a schedule that comes out that's called an air plan. And it describes, what each squadron is going to be doing throughout the course of the day in terms of flying, and then each squadron will take the airplane and make their own flight schedule. But the air plan has a very hilarious mocking cartoon of Dave and his wingman. So Dave debriefs, and they didn't have any recording devices on their airplane. So they had no FLIR, which is not uncommon. A lot of the times, if you're just going out for a fighter mission, you don't put a FLIR in the airplane. It's removable. And he didn't turn his tape recorder on. When we go out and do training, or if you're going out in real combat, there's a sort of a cadence that you go through. You would say speed angels left, speed angels right, check your tapes on, fights on. And that's the cadence that you go through. It's kind of like a quarterback saying, all right, ready, hut, hut, hut. And it reminds everybody that they're in the right place at the right time. And
when you say tapes, that's audio and video?
Yeah, exactly. And radar as well. So the Wizzo in the back will have a camera on his radar screen. So just the way this thing worked out, it was so bizarre, and they never got to the mindset where they would turn their tapes on. So Dave is frustrated by that, and he's going back to his squadron's paraloft, which is where all the gear hangs. And the next wave from his squadron is going out, and he tells these guys, hey, listen, I don't know what the fuck that thing was. I don't know if I can swear on this show, but but do you guys have a FLIR on your plane? And they did. And he said, make sure you bring a tape and make sure you turn your tape on. And they said, okay. And so...
And by the way, the other F-18 didn't have it on either. That was with Fravor?
No.
Okay.
And that's not, to a certain degree, you're just going to have to take my word that they were caught by something unawares, and it kicked them out of their normal routine.
Well, and I guess what you're saying is you would make sure you turn that on when you're about to start your exercises.
Right.
They really hadn't started their exercises yet.
Right. Yeah. They just thought they were doing a favor for the Princeton. So anyway, the next wave goes out, and there's only 2 Super Hornets in this one. So they're going to split up, and one will go to the cap, and one goes to the southern cap to play the bad guy, and then they'll swap roles. So there's only 2 of them in this airplane. And they are proceeding towards the cap, the same cap that Dave and his wingman were going to. And as they're on autopilot, just heading to this spot in space, the Wizzo in range while scan picks up a very faint contact. And he's trying to lock it. So that, I don't know how familiar you are with the way radars work, but it's essentially like a flashlight. Okay, so say this room is completely dark, and I turn my flashlight on and I just sweep it back and forth at a certain rate. And every time it passes Michael, I say, oh, there's Michael, but I can only kind of get a glimpse of him. I know he's there, but I don't have a ton of data. And if I want to get serious about Michael as a threat, I just point my flashlight at him and hold it there. And now I've got the whole picture. But I lose everything else, right? I don't see what else is in the room. So there's positives and negatives to range while scan, which is big picture, but small amount of specific data, versus what's called single target track, which is narrow picture, but a lot of very detailed data of the target. So the Wizzo is trying to lock this thing up, and he's unable to lock it up in single target track. Can't get a track file on it. So as they get closer, maybe 30 miles away, he slaves the FLIR. And the FLIR, you've got all these different devices, and they all can slave to each other. He takes the FLIR head, seeker head, and he slaves it to the faint radar return, which is right on his nose, because they're heading for the cap, and that's where the thing is. And that's the video that you see. So he's 30 to maybe 15 miles away as he's progressing towards it. And he's playing around with the flare. There's two different, I mean, the flare also is a laser, but it's not useful in this.
And FLIR is radar?
No, FLIR is optical and infrared.
Okay.
Forward-looking infrared it's an acronym. And he slaves the FLIR towards this thing, and he's switching back and forth. And if you look at the video, you can see it go from, white contrast to dark contrast. And one of those is infrared, and the other is just an optical camera. It's a black and white camera. But it's beyond the range that it's supposed to be used at.
It was day or night at the time?
It was day. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 3:30 by the time they get out there. Beautiful Southern California sunny day. Now, the FLIR, what it's designed to do is provide ranging and targeting for a bomb on the ground. So 2, 3, 4 miles away. That's it. So you put the crosshairs on a tank and your laser-guided bomb will hit that tank. It's not designed for aerial intercepts. It's not designed to lock onto a maneuvering target that's moving at any speed faster than, a tank would. That's not the function of a FLIR. So he's locked onto this thing as it's hanging stationary, and the only movement is provided by that Hornet traveling towards it.
The Tic Tac was stationary?
Yep, just hanging. And when they get, 15-ish miles away, which is, again, pretty damn far for what the FLIR is supposed to be doing, it exits the frame to the left so quickly that in normal speed it looks like it disappears. But if you go frame by frame, you can see a little bit of it in the next frame, and then it's gone. And then they never saw it again. So it's a minute and a half. That's the entirety of the video. There's no other video out there. There's no video of maneuvering Tic Tacs. There's no video of the F-18s trying to get into contact with the Tic Tacs.
But it seems like there's multiple sections of video, because certainly the audio clips that you hear, oh my gosh, man, dude, did you see that?
That's
what
different.
Was that?
That's on the East Coast. That's
okay.
That's the 2015, I think, episode on the Roosevelt. I don't have any, other than what you see on the internet or on the news. I don't have any information on that.
Okay, so
those are
good
different.
To clarify. That's good to clarify. So as far as the video that pertain to the 2004 Nimitz incident, all you really have is video of it sitting there,
and then
taking off. Yeah.
So, like I said, I always showed the video at the end of telling the story because it doesn't make any sense if you don't know the information leading up to it. And the reason why it's going from white to black and white to black, when he's in the infrared mode, you should be able to see roiling gases, right? Whether if it's a helicopter or a Harrier or something with a jet or some form of normal propulsion, you would see gases coming underneath. But you don't get any of that. And in the contrast mode, it's just a camera, so you wouldn't see anything there anyway. But there's data boxes on the bottom right and left that show closure. They show his attempt to lock it up. You should get a V sub C, which is the velocity of closure on that, but it's just a bunch of nines, which means it's not getting any closure data from the radar at all. So there's a bunch of little technical stuff on that is pertinent.
But you're saying it's about 90 seconds.
I think it's about 90 seconds. I haven't timed it, but it's not 10 minutes, that's for sure.
Yeah, but the majority of it is just it's sitting there, and then it leaves the screen, and that's it. That's the video.
That's it. It's an unremarkable video without the story.
Yeah. Then, okay, so the East Coast video, which is what most of us, at least I know what I've had in mind, so I don't want to conflate the two, but I mean, pretty incredible that something so similar happened
10 years later.
Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just I know you haven't really necessarily boned up on what happened on the East Coast, but from what you know about it,
I mean, I don't have any inside information on that one. Actually, it sounds fairly dramatically different. There's a lot more contacts from what I understand, just from reading. And again, I never talked to any of those pilots. I don't know anybody that was involved in that at all. But just, from my own, my own experience, just looking at that, it looks a lot different.
As far as you know, is there a classified report like that one pertaining to the East Coast?
I have no idea. That I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I wonder why the Nimitz is getting seems to get more attention than the East Coast incident, which remind me, what was the name of the ship that they?
I think it was Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
And the video's the gimbal, I think.
Yeah, they call them gimbal.
There's one of them's gimbal and the other one's go fast.
Yeah.
So the go fast one, to me, it could be anything. It could be a cruise missile that they finally lock up. I have no idea. I don't know what the claims are on that. The gimbal one, that's insane. I mean, if it's accurate, if it's real, if it's not some sort of a fabrication, that's a remarkable video.
But sorry, tell me how, in your view, it's so. Let's call it the gimbal.
Yeah.
The gimbal is so different than the Tic Tac.
So I watched one of the pilots that was involved in that incident talking about it with Dave and I think Lou Elizondo. And what he was describing was multiple things in formation. One of them was different than the others. It's the gimbal one that you see sort of rotating around. There were multiple instances where the aircrew were going out there. They're almost used to seeing it to a certain degree, at least according to this video. So it's dramatically, I think, different than what happened on the Nimitz. I think, to answer your question, the thing that makes the Nimitz incident so unique is that Dave is the only pilot that we know of to have ever sort of gotten engaged with one of these things. No one's ever really maneuvered with them before. They've just observed them.
In other words, the ones on the East Coast, yes, we've got interesting video, but we don't have in-person sightings. The pilots there.
I think I saw them. I think listening to that, but they didn't get involved with them. They didn't try to dogfight them, for lack of a better term. And on the Princeton, you've got independent people on the Princeton that are validating these radar tracks that they saw. The E2 that was involved in the Nimitz incident, those guys heard everything. It's just there's multiple sources, multiple data points that correlate to this incident happening the way everybody said it happened. So the story is consistent across the board. And again, I have no inside information on what happened on the East Coast, but
as far as the object that was observed by Fravor and the others, that seems very similar to what was observed on the East Coast.
Again, all I know about the East Coast is what I heard on that TV show, and it sounds like they're different to me. They're described in a different way. Certainly, the bigger one, the one that gimbals around, it looks drastically different than what Dave saw, and Dave and the others.
But maneuverability similar.
Sure. Yeah.
And what about the ability to? What was there sightings on the East Coast as far as it being hovering above the water or going under the water?
I think they were all up at altitude. It did hover. It stayed stationary, however you want to describe that. I don't know the specifics on that. Sorry, man.
So you made a big point that Fravor thought it was odd. The other guys thought it was odd that they were asked, do you guys have weapons on board? Because obviously they don't.
Right.
They're not in combat.
Right.
So let's start with Fravor, if he shared with you, what did he make of that question?
Well, they all thought it was weird. I mean, it's just a weird question to be asked. I think he thought maybe it was potentially drug runners or something like that. They literally had no idea why the Princeton was sending him to this spot. They said, will you just go check something out, essentially. I don't know what the exact lingo was, but it wasn't, hey, we've been seeing UFOs. Can you go look at them for us?
I mean, I guess the question is, were they asking the question in hopes that the answer was yes or in the hopes that the answer was no?
Yeah.
Because to begin with, it's a weird question because, of course, we don't. So why are you asking me such a dumb question, right?
Well, but the people that work on the Princeton don't necessarily know what the fighter planes are doing. They have it's not in their world. That's not their purview. Their purview is the radar.
Whose decision would you say it was to send them out to inspect this? How high up in the command would that have come from?
There's a tactical action officer that works on the Princeton. He's sort of the quarterback of that combat information center. They could have just asked him. I mean, it could have been something as casual like, hey, should we just check these out. We got a couple planes. Why don't we send them out there to check it out?
Right.
And it's on the way, so it's no big deal. You know what I mean? It's
right.
It could have been as casual as that.
But let's talk about the weapons thing and whether or not the U.S. Navy would send its F-18 planes out and pilots to go check out some aerial phenomena that we don't know what it is or what it may be, and we're sending them out unarmed.
Sure. Yeah. So I think you're making, like, it's not the U.S. Navy sending them out. It's some guy at a radar console who's like, I've been seeing something weird. Why don't we go have somebody go check it out with their eyeballs?
Well, it's potentially dangerous. It's a potentially dangerous mission.
But that's what, you're in the military. Danger is part of what you do.
Right. But it's always nice
and we
to
do
have
that
weapons if you're heading into a dangerous situation.
But they didn't know. It was curious. It was a curiosity, in my estimation. And they just said, hey, look, let's send these guys out. Let's go check it out. And somebody probably said from the back of the room, hey, wonder if they have any weapons on board just in case, because they probably had gotten a little bit spooked. But they didn't share anything like that with the pilots. And so somebody hit a radio button and said, hey, any chance you guys got weapons on?
But bottom line, we don't know who made the decision to direct them to go out there and check it out. It could have come from the highest level. It could have come from a relatively low level. We really don't know, right?
Well, I mean, I think what you're insinuating is two radically different scenarios that converge at the same place. But it sounds like what you're asking is whether or not this was a way to have the Navy guys go out and check out some sort of tech that was developed, and they're going to go check it out. And they wanted to make sure that they didn't have anything on board so that nobody would get hurt.
Yeah.
That's
that's sort of where I'm going. I'm now tying this in with the Turber story because, as you sit here today, you're saying that you do believe that Fravor did in fact encounter something real.
Yeah. I mean, Fravor and the other three and the Princeton and the E2.
So, now it turns to the next part of the story, which is, okay, what the heck was it that they saw?
Yeah, I don't know.
And that's what we've been trying to investigate, and it all started with this Mike Turber interview that I did, where he says that it's U.S. technology, and it seems to me that there's only two choices for what this thing is. Broadly speaking, it's either earthly or it's extraterrestrial.
Agreed.
So now, actually, I had a guest on, Nick Cook. Have you heard of Nick Cook?
I've heard the name. I don't know who he is.
Anyway, he was the aviation editor for Jane's Defense Weekly, and a big shot in the area. He came up with a third explanation, was some type of altered reality, altered consciousness type of technology.
Wow.
But anyway, so I'm saying, okay, well, there's a third option, but let's put that one aside for a second, and we'll let him specialize in that.
That would be a good one in the bar.
He just wrote a book about that, so I think that was part of the reason why he was bringing that up.
Okay.
Let's stick with the two that you seem to be comfortable with, the idea that it's either Earth or extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
But it is one or the other. So it would be unbelievable that it was extraterrestrial because we've never had confirmed extraterrestrial craft found
sightings,
by Earth. And it would be really incredible if it was earthly technology, because we certainly don't think that we have this earthly technology. So either way, the answer is an incredible answer.
Sure.
So, when people, are critical of Turber and what he claims, is like, guys, it's one or the other. Both are incredible. Which one gives you, it seems to have a credible explanation behind it. And there's a lot of credibility behind it, in my view. And we're going to dig into that. Part of it is these Navy patents that I've reviewed. I don't know if you're familiar with these Navy patents.
I heard them when I listened to a little bit of that Turber interview, and
so
got to
the
that
technology
point.
is described in these patents. They've certainly been investigating this type of technology for a long time, and so now bringing it back to the weapons and so on. You know, that theory being that, and you could confirm or deny that this is a good theory, that the reason the Air Force, which supposedly, according to Turber, these were Air Force craft, was comfortable testing them in that area, is they know that the Navy does its exercises unarmed. So we're not going to have one of our Tic Tacs accidentally shot down.
Sure.
And furthermore, the reason that the Navy was comfortable sending these pilots out to what could otherwise be seen as a dangerous situation is the fact that they knew what it was. They knew it was us.
Yeah.
So we're sending them out there unarmed. And why somebody confirmed they're unarmed? Well, just, again, to make sure that we're not shooting down our own craft up there.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that sort of poke holes in the credulity of that scenario. Now, I think it's important to say that I'm not necessarily discounting that it's human tech. I just think that the scenario of it being a test of human tech it doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's good because, I mean, we need to, again, I think you and I are on the same page. It's either earthly or it's extraterrestrial. I lean toward earthly irrespective of the Turber story, but to analyze some of the details of what Turber said and to poke holes in those things will then help us determine, whether the bigger things that Turber says may be true. So, for instance, it sounds like you're saying this doesn't make sense to you, that the U.S. Air Force would test these things out over
that's not the way
Southern California?
Testing is done. But, I mean, my first point of reference is this report. Again, this seems to be like a really genuine first blush look at this by some governmental agency that has access to everything, right? And very, very clearly in this investigation, as part of their findings, is that there were no tapes taken from the E-2. The E-2 didn't have tapes on board, so there are no tapes from that. That the video is the video that we see, and that this information was sent up the information chain to the highest levels, Third Fleet, and that nobody gave a shit. Nobody knew. It was so far out of sort of the world of reality that all these people, these very, very busy people that are getting, tens of thousands of sailors worked up to go on deployment, somebody said, we saw a UFO. Here's a little video. What the fuck is this? This means nothing to me. I've got all kinds of stuff in my inbox. And this went up in this investigation, talked to the commander of the strike group, the admiral, who was still in the Navy when the investigation took place. So 11 years later, he's still
What's his name?
I'm not going to say. I don't know if it's out there or not, but you can do your own homework on that one.
But
it's
just to be
public
clear,
information.
the admiral of the strike group, which is the highest of the high when it comes to that.
He's the boss.
Yep.
And he's being asked by a governmental agency that's clearly been tasked to look into this. And he said, look, I don't know. I was briefed on it. My intelligence officer briefed me on it. It is of concern to the strike group because this thing could not be tracked. If it meant ill will towards us, we had nothing that could stop it. But other than that, I got nothing for you, and I don't really care. And that sentiment went all the way down. So, there's the commander of the strike group. I already described to you that there's the captain of the ship and the captain of the air wing, commander of the air wing, and then there's the squadron CO. So there's basically 3 levels there with some other administrative and chiefs of staff and stuff like that. But these are the 3 department or office heads. And Fravor is number 3. If there was anything going on, he would have known about it. It would be irresponsible to send somebody into a test of that magnitude without letting people know that they were somehow involved in a test of that magnitude. If something happened and somebody freaked out and crashed, heads would roll. People would, and it's not beyond the realm of conceiving that somebody would see a UFO coming at them and just freak out and accidentally hit, their lead or something like that, or do something out of the ordinary. So that's not the way we test weapons. That's never has been. It's not the way we test weapon systems. It's not the way we challenge each other as forces. The Air Force doesn't send secret projects to test the Navy. The Navy doesn't do that to the Air Force. That's not the way things work.
Well, just to be clear, I think what Turber would say is at the highest levels, including probably the admiral, and not that he would necessarily tell this guy that was doing that investigation, but anyway, look, at the highest levels, Air Force and Navy were in communication with each other as to what was going on.
Yeah.
It's just we're not going to share it with the squadron commander.
I don't believe that to be true. It defies all logic. It defies every ounce of experience that I've had in 20 years in the military. You know, I've got friends that are admirals now, and that's just not the way we do business. You know, if tomorrow somehow the veil lifted and they all said, "Ha ha, we played a trick on you," and
well,
of
just
course,
to be clear, I mean, what part is the part that is not the way we do business? Because obviously, there's a lot of things that the higher ups know that the guys down here don't know, classified stuff all the time. So
sure, but that's so when where the rubber meets the road is where the aviators are doing their work. Okay, so when you're an admiral, you delegate authority. Okay, you delegate responsibility. You delegate. The admiral's not controlling the pieces on a board. You know, if there was some sort of a test to take place, I don't know why you would do a test like that in the first place. I mean, if you're building something like this, it's clearly going to be the most expensive weapon system ever made, right? It'll make the F-35 look like child's play in terms of cost. Then you're going to have a very regimented testing and development schedule. You're going to
presumably
put all kinds of efforts. What you're talking about is basically kids playing hide and seek, and that's not how you.
But I mean, let's
use
be clear.
Expensive weapon systems.
When we talk
it
about
just doesn't
testing,
make sense.
though, I think again, Turber's not here, so I'll speak for Turber, I guess.
Well, let me just interrupt you with this last thing. It's like none of the technology that was in that carrier strike group is secret to the United States. If you were building the most expensive weapon system ever built, you would take the Spy 1 radar, build another one, put it in some frickin' Nevada desert, and fly your little Tic Tac at it in 100,000 different ways at night, and then come up with your own analysis. And if you needed an F-18 radar, you would take an F-18 radar and put it on a truck and have some super stealthy secret squirrel guy in the back seat doing whatever he wanted to do. It just it doesn't make any sense to run a program that way.
Yeah, I guess the question would have to be, what is the test? When we say test, there's 1,000 different things to test. The day you first start it and you first see if you can get off the ground or whatever, there's that test. And right? So what were they, quote unquote, testing on that particular day? To your point, you're saying that, well, they could have been testing to see if the radar could pick this thing up, but they could also have taken the radar themselves and tested it. They didn't need to. So if that's true, then it would be back to the thing of we're going to test to see how our own Navy would respond to this as a way of testing how other military, the other countries' militaries might respond to it.
Yeah, but you wouldn't do that in a very sort of casual training scenario. You would have the full. You would have everybody up and ready, up in arms, you know, ready to engage with this thing. You wouldn't send them out and say, "Hey, go see if you see anything over there, and let me know what happens." And then the thing does a 360 and leaves. I mean, that's a 90-second test that you've essentially put, multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier and strike group and fighter planes in a certain point in time.
But it wasn't really. I mean, would you say this was a dangerous mission for? I mean, assuming it was Air Force technology, so this is not something that's going to fight it.
Sure.
I mean, what they were asked to do to go check these things out, you wouldn't call that dangerous.
No, it's not dangerous, but there is, the law of unintended consequences. What if both of these planes had crashed into the ocean because they freaked out? Or what if they had hit each other? Planes hit each other. It happens. Yeah. I mean, I lost many, many friends flying in naval aviation. Only one airplane out of the 20-ish was hit in combat. Most of it happens in training.
Yeah. In fact, there was just a couple planes that crashed where?
I think it was Air Force.
Air Force?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most of the deaths, even in World War II, most of the deaths happened in training. So if you lost 2 people in training or 2 airplanes through some ill-conceived, ill-designed test, how would you explain that to their parents and their wives and their children? You would feel horrible. And this is something that the military has experience with, right? I mean, we lose people all the time.
As you just point out, we lose more pilots and planes in training than we do in combat.
Yes.
Okay.
But you try to do it for a reason. And you try to do it, but you try to do it in a way that makes sense, that you can glean the most amount of information from it, right? I mean, when we go, do low-level training, you're flying a jet at 100 feet off the ground at 500 knots. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to do that. It's super fun. But you learn how to use your airplane in a way that you can't learn anywhere else, right? You're zipping through valleys and over mountains. You're training yourself to fly this airplane to the maximum extent possible. There's a value to that. And every once in a while, somebody dies. But the value to learning how to fly your plane in that manner overrides the risk and the occasional loss.
Yeah. It's a risk reward, but I would just say that, as you acknowledge, if this is in fact U.S. technology, it's one of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind and gives us incredible dominance. So if you think about how significant this is versus the risk.
Well, okay, to your point, if it is the most significant advancement in U.S. technology, why roll it out like this? That doesn't make any sense either. I mean, we've developed some incredible things and kept them secret for a little while until they were used, and then everybody was like, "Oh, that's so cool! The F-117 stealth bomber, it's amazing." It was probably one of the most successful, or the Manhattan Project, right? Developing a nuclear bomb. Those are incredible advancements in technology, but they weren't developed and released in the manner that you're discussing. It doesn't make really any sense to do it that way.
Well, but we're 17 years out from the 2004 incident, and this information still hasn't been released. So
I think that people don't know what to release. I don't know that there's
Well, what I'm saying is, if it's U.S. technology, it has been kept top secret, undisclosed all this time.
Sure.
So they have kept it under their hat. In fact, and I think it was Nick Cook that we were talking to, or maybe not, was talking about how long they kept secret one of those stealth technologies. It was
F-117. It was a long time. I would say maybe 10 years. I don't know. It was definitely an Air Force project.
One of my first things was, no way could you keep something like this. Speaking of the Tic Tac being U.S. technology, no way could you keep it quiet for this long. But then I was explained to me that, no, we've kept things secret for a decade or two.
I don't know about that long. So I don't believe in conspiracy theories, and I don't believe in secrets. I don't think you can really keep things secret for more than a generation. It just doesn't work.
Well, that's right about where we are right now as a generation.
Yeah.
He's claiming it was first flown probably about 20 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
So 2004 would have been, a few years after it originally.
Okay. I mean, it just doesn't look. He's got a point of view on that, and that's great. To me, it makes no sense at all. It makes absolutely no sense.
Okay, what about this then? So you're saying for sure it doesn't make sense to you based on your experience, and that's what you're here for, is based on your experience. Because
I thought I was here for my book, man.
We're going to get to your book, but I don't have experience with it. You do. So, okay, so then I guess the next thing could have been simply that they were testing them, and it turns out that the Navy spotted them and sent some craft out. So this wasn't intended at all, but they were out there, testing the Tic Tac technology, and the Navy happened to encounter it.
Now, to me, that actually has a little bit of validity to it. So, the Spy 1 radar, and again, I'm not a ship guy, and I don't know the generations of their radar, but I know that the Spy 1B, I think it was on the Princeton, was brand new. So maybe they've got something that the people who developed the Tic Tac didn't know. They didn't realize that it would show up on this radar. That's fine. I could buy that. That makes more sense to me than some tests that went awry.
Okay. Well, that's helping the story. I like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit then, and then we're going to get to the book. But just to finish up on the Turber stuff and some of the stuff he says about, for instance, this Plant 42 and what you know about,
I don't know anything about that stuff. I really don't.
And what do you know about just, secret projects in general that, Air Force or Navy has, and how long it takes them to develop things and ultimately to release them? And when were you privy to things in your position as a pilot? As need arose. So the only time, and there's been questions about NDAs and stuff like that. The only time I ever signed an NDA or some version of an NDA is when we were going on deployment and we were carrying some new weapons that were, it was important that nobody else knew that we had these capabilities, and we were briefed in a huge room, all the aviators that would come into contact with these things. And our commander of the air group sat us down and said, here's the deal.
Don't fuck it up. This is important. It's important that nobody knows that we have this. So you can't sit in a bar because, like Dave Fravor did with me, you put 2-3 aviators in a bar with a couple glasses of, alcoholic beverages, and we tell stories. That's what we do. And they convinced us that it was the right thing to do not to talk about this stuff. That's it. That's the only time I've ever had any kind of experience with that.
What do you make of the fact that the Navy came forward and confirmed that this is actual Navy video and these guys, in fact, encountered this, as opposed to just keeping quiet about it?
I mean, I think it's great. I mean, why wouldn't they tell anybody?
In general, doesn't our military tend towards secrecy rather than disclosure?
When it makes sense. It's not. You hold secrets when they do you good, when they're useful to you, right? When having that information and not sharing it with others is of use to you. If they don't know what these things are and they're flying around, then what's the point of keeping them secret?
Well, it might scare the bejesus out of people to think that these things are flying around and our own military doesn't know what the heck they are.
Well, that's fine.
Kind of scary.
It's not the Navy's job to make people feel good when they're watching The Simpsons or whatever. It's their job is to fly planes and sail ships and
But you don't see
mission.
that perhaps as part of a change in policy, because the other thing that's come out now is the Navy has made it very clear that, hey, pilots, we want you to report
for sure
aerial phenomena such as this, and we're not going to wear our tinfoil hats when you report it anymore.
Right. I think it's an interesting shift in policy. So again, when I was in the Navy, I never saw anything. Nobody I knew ever saw anything until I heard of this story. And there was no policy. Nobody ever came to me and said, hey, just in case, make sure your tape's on and, get as much detail as possible. Nobody ever said that. It never came up. Clearly, things have changed since 2004. And, when it happened, those guys were ridiculed. There was a cartoon I think I mentioned earlier. They were mocked the next day on the airplane. There's a UFO that's crashed and Dave's flying away, and the cartoon says, with Black Ace 1, that would have been his call sign, being a master of air-to-air combat, the UFO never stood a chance, right? So they were ribbed, and they were ribbed for weeks. And now, after my article, then the New York Times article, then the videos from the East Coast, I think people are saying, there's something out there, perhaps we don't know what it is, but let's take it more seriously from the Navy point of view. And if,
knowing the Navy, where would that change in policy have emanated from? Secretary of the Navy or the Secretary of Defense or the President or what?
I don't know. That I don't know. Other than in the last couple of days, the president generally doesn't get involved in granular aspects of, dealing with the military.
You do have a guy, though, who's an extremely unique president, to say the least.
Sure.
Right?
But he wasn't president in 2004.
You have No, but I'm talking about just in the past 6 months what the Navy has come out with, where they've acknowledged the legitimacy of the video, because that was this year, and this new policy.
Yeah.
So, and supposedly Trump has been briefed about, he was asked about it by Tucker Carlson and George Stephanopoulos, and he acknowledged that he's been briefed about this.
Right.
So, you have an unorthodox president who is a genuine outsider, and someone who tends to buy into conspiracies such as, the whole Obama birther thing, et cetera. So
right.
I'm thinking it's very possible that this more openness, if we could call it that, could be kind of coming from that high.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know that changes anything, but yeah, that it's entirely possible.
So as you sit here today, earthly or extraterrestrial?
I don't know. I don't have a dog in this hunt. So I will say that the only perspective I have on this is from Dave himself, who said at one point, somebody asked him, it wasn't me, somebody said, do you think it posed the same question that you just did? And he said, I don't think it's of this world. And that's it. I mean, I didn't see anything. I've read the report. Anybody could read a report. I think there's a lot of confirmation bias that comes around this subject. People are validated by the rumors that they hear. Their opinions are validated by the rumors that they hear. And they latch onto things like the 10-minute video or, all this kind of this BS that's floating out there now. I don't know, and it doesn't. To me, it doesn't really matter either way. It doesn't.
It's a bit intriguing though. No,
it's super intriguing,
Okay.
but I don't have any. I don't have any insight into. If it was UFOs, my supposition is that it's a drone that's like an exploratory drone that's sent out.
Yeah.
I don't think that humans could survive the maneuvers that Tic Tac was doing. Unless there was some really crazy tech in there that protects you somehow from that, like a Marvel movie or something like that. But or it's a drone. It's an incredibly sophisticated, advanced drone.
Have you been tracking? It looks like Fravor now is hanging out with Bob Lazar a bit. Are you familiar much with Bob Lazar?
No. Who's he?
Oh, you're not familiar with him?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, Michael's very familiar with him because he's been
Okay.
tracking this for a long time. I just learned about him. He was on Joe Rogan's show before Fravor was. Did you hear
Okay.
Fravor on Rogan?
No.
Okay.
But I've
Okay.
heard everything you
the
said
story
1,000
already.
times. Yeah.
So anyway, Rogan had him on for a couple hours, and before that it was Bob Lazar, and then I heard Fravor say that he was at an event with Bob Lazar. Anyway, he's the one from Area 51 who is one of the few who's come out and reported that, what we were working on? We were working on alien technology. I saw the flying saucers, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's another. I mean, you didn't really bring that up. So I had a little bit of an encounter with TTSA. I was going to write a book for those guys. And do you know
To the Stars
Yeah.
Academy?
And sort of they're a UFO research organization that also has a commercial aspect of books and films. So I was going to write one of the series of books, and whatever, it didn't work out. But I talked to Tom DeLonge for a long time, and his theories are that it's UFO tech that's crashed, and somebody's been able to exploit it.
Right.
And he's got a lot of other theories as well. But that's a third, fourth, fifth, sixth possibility. You could throw any
Right.
number on that. I will say that. So this, you're asking me whether I believe it's of this world or not, and I don't really know. But one of the people I've talked to, and I've sort of refreshed all my contacts recently, knowing that I was coming on your show. A guy I know that worked at Bigelow at Bass was
That's
saying,
Robert Bigelow's company,
Yep.
which is called Bass.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's.
And supposedly they got the bulk of the funding to.
Yeah, but
do
it wasn't a
this
lot. It was
research.
$22-ish million, which is nothing, right? I mean, that's like pocket change, if that, for the federal government. But he said, and I haven't been able to do this. I haven't been able to find it yet because it was fairly recently. But he said, look, the Bigelow contract from the government is out there. It's on the internet. Somebody can find it. It's been found. It's in some online site. The interesting thing in that contract is that there's 9 very specific areas of research that we were asked to do, and there's an agency that funded it, and whatever agency that is very important to know. So I haven't found it yet. He didn't tell me.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
really interesting lead.
It is an interesting lead. And I'm
So
throwing it
this
out
is-
there. I've got no.
This is part of Department of Defense.
No, Bigelow is not part of the Department of Defense.
No, sorry.
Oh, yes,
What-
there's an There is a organization. It may or may not be a Defense Department organization. It may or may not be Air Force, whatever, Navy. It could be the CIA. I don't know because I haven't seen it yet. And
He wasn't talking about ATIP though,
no.
because supposedly the money went through ATIP. ATIP was
No. This is well before ATIP. Oh, well. So he didn't say it was ATIP. He said, if you can find it, look and see what it's in the contract. See who it was whose budget that money came out of. That $22 million.
right.
So if any of your listeners are out there, they can find that and they can send it to you. That I think that would move the discussion forward, because I think all the stuff about the video and the Tic Tac and the gimbal and all that stuff is interesting, but it's really not going to move it forward. And if people care about taking the discussion forward, then that's probably the next step.
Cool. All right, let's talk about Lions of the Sky. I read a little synopsis of it. Haven't gotten to read the thing yet, but looking forward to reading it.
Yeah.
It
There's
sounds,
no UFOs.
It sounds a little bit like one of my favorite movies, Top Gun. Tell me what's behind the book.
Yeah, sure. So It's a story about a class of young F-18 students, and they're going through their training to become qualified F-18 pilots. There's a male flight instructor he's on his last tour, and he's got some issues with female pilots, and there's 2 females in this class, and there's some.
You got to already be working on the screenplay for this.
Yeah, I wish.
Who's playing the lead?
I don't know.
Pilot?
Those are the worst questions. I have no idea. But anyway, sort of counterbalance against that is a rising threat in the South China Sea, a real world threat. And obviously, at the end of the story, there's this great climactic battle scene where people prove their mettle, and it's a little bit of a compilation of all my experiences flying fighters for 20 years, flying in the Navy, and the inherent drama and danger of landing on aircraft carriers, and the excitement of learning how to fly and shoot missiles and bomb and guns and stuff like that, and the real human story of the dealing with these challenges and the fears and the sort of remnants of sexism that exist in the fighter community, and it's a really very human thriller.
Yeah.
So
there probably weren't a lot of female pilots around when you first started.
There were not, and
were they even permitted?
About halfway through my active duty career. So my female lead in this is based on one of my squadron mates, who unfortunately was the first female F-14 pilot and the first woman to die flying in fighters. She died trying to land on the Lincoln, and she was just this awesome person, really great, dynamic personality. She was a skilled pilot who was assailed for her gender, and then after she died, her gender was used as proof that she was unqualified, even though that's not what the investigation showed. So her memory never left me, and I designed my female lead around her. Like, what would her life have looked like had she not died? How would she have overcome and convinced people around her that she was indeed where she was meant to be? So she's a little bit of a badass, and the dude's pretty fun and cool, and there's some good.
That's incredible. It's based on that true life
Yeah.
event. So, as we sit here today, what percentage of fighter pilots are female?
Very small percentage, and it's the Navy has done a great job, I think, in the last 20 years of encouraging minorities of all stripes, women, men of color, women of color, to join all parts of the Navy. It's just something that not a lot of women have gone into. So hopefully more than ever,
is
and hopefully
there
more.
an inherent advantage that a man would have as a pilot? The only thing I can think of is the physical aspect. Is there a physical strength aspect to being a fighter jet pilot?
You have to have some strength. But listen, my wife tells me that giving birth to children takes more strength than I'll ever know, so I'll have to take her word for it. And there are plenty of women out there that have done just fine and gone on to be, commanders of the air group. So it's not physical. I think there's some cultural issues around women. Most fighter pilots, men, start off as young boys, and they're like, "This is what I want to do," from the time they can tie their shoes, and they're encouraged to do that. I don't think that's the same with women. It's not the same sort of cultural encouragement. So,
last little piece I'd like to cover with you regarding the book is South China Sea. Why South China Sea as a point of conflict? What's going on? What's going on there that people need to know about, that we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, well, it's a part of the world that's always fascinated me. And one of the other questions other than UFOs that I always get asked is like, where's the next war going to happen? And the South China Sea is a very, very legitimate flashpoint. It's a place of huge concern. A third of the world's oil travels through there. There's a massive amount of natural gas, potentially a huge amount of oil underneath the ocean. It's international waters, but that regime has claimed it as their own through force.
Is that also where they're building the islands?
Yeah, they've taken all these atolls and militarized them, even though they said they wouldn't. So it's an obvious imperialistic move by the Chinese.
So, other than not wanting China to get too big and too scary, would you say the only other concern about the South China Sea really is the shipping lanes?
So, the United States is an island nation, in essence. Okay, so we survive on the ability to trade, free trade, and we are the world's protectors of the sea lanes. That's what the Navy does. We go out throughout the world, and our primary mission is to protect the sea lanes. If somebody, and that's one of the most valuable straits, chokeholds, navigational areas on planet Earth. If somebody decided to take over the Panama Canal that was unfriendly to us, that would be a huge source of concern. And it would allow China to control the trade in the Pacific. So that's a very big deal. I mean, that affects us moving forward in a huge way.
And how close are they getting to possibly being able to do that?
It's, if it weren't for the U.S., in opposition, in sort of blatant opposition, they claim these waters and we sail our ships through them. And we tell them, like, hey, we're going to send a ship through tomorrow. Don't shoot us unless you mean business.
Is this one of the things that's on the table right now in the big negotiations with China?
No, that's all trade.
But there's nothing about, hey, guys, knock it off with these islands and stop militarizing these islands, et cetera?
I don't think that's on the trade negotiations, no. It is a discussion point, but it's not a trade discussion point.
No. Cool. Paco, thank you so much for coming down.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Wealth of information. I didn't know. You surprised me with a classified report. I tried to get that out of your hand during the interview.
Yeah,
and it wasn't coming out of his hand. That's how I know that thing really is classified.
I don't really care about the information in it. It's just that I was asked not to reveal names, and that's really all I care about. I've got a trust with my people that I flew in the Navy with, and some of them don't want their names out there.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to both promote the book and the fact that you were the first one to break the Tic Tac UFO
That's
story.
right, in a bar.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks, guys.